Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hey, did I just pay to go watch a political ad for 2+ hours?
Kind of, but I don't even know who for, because I feel like this movie appeals to a demo that isn't really on the ticket this year. So,
I mean, true, but I think
there's
it appeals
crossover appeal.
It appeals to a demo of a fan base that is very much in belief that there's crossover.
True.
So we went and saw Reagan, and I want to say this up front. I can't speak for Hayden, and I might not even be able to pull this up, but I'm going to try hard to not come at this from a political point of view, because it has a very specific target audience, and neither of us are it.
No.
So
it's very much going for like the confirmation bias crowd, right? This is not trying.
Oh, totally.
It's not a biopic that's really trying to be educational or informative. It's giving you the greatest hits of this guy.
I would argue, hey, I don't even know if we need to do spoiler alerts here. It's a biopic, or it claims it is.
Yeah.
If you've read a history book, you'll A, know what happens, and B, know that what happens in this movie isn't very true. So
not all of it anyway.
It is a biopic in name only. No, there are real events. And I guess so I'll start out with this. Like, what I had my biggest issue with in this movie, Hayden, is like, I feel like they take events. First of all, they give us like the Cliff Notes journey of this history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very like hit and run with all the stuff. And there's no effort or interest into digging into any of his missteps, shall we say.
Yeah.
And when they do, it's glossed over as it's just a mistake. He was coming from a good place.
Yeah, and there's like a little moment where they kind of show like the detractors, right, protesting and doing their crazy graffiti and all the signs they have and stuff. And it's very much just like it's played for laughs, right? Like anyone protesting him, I think, is kind of played for laughs in this movie.
Oh, they're all a bunch of little hippie, whiny babies.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to put them in their place.
Except for the one who has gumption. That guy can hang, and he ends up giving him a job. Which I'm curious to see if that story is true, because if it is, that's actually really cool and interesting.
But I don't even think he was like the hippie, whiny baby. I think he was a legit supporter that,
for sure,
was all about it. It's just that was the style back then. So, but yeah, my biggest issue with this is like, it takes the events that Reagan is known for both in the presidency and pre-presidency, like drops him through this magical machine that makes Ronald Reagan look like the principal hero in all of them, and then spits it out on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, it's creating this narrative that like Ronald Reagan's purpose in life was to destroy communism and
save freedom,
the USSR, this big fat L. And yeah, I mean, I think it's been talked to death, so I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I think like a lot of the things that happened in the USSR, he happened to be the president at that time, right? I think the Soviet Union was collapsing in on itself long before he got involved as much as he did, right? I think most historians argue that like Chernobyl was the final nail in the coffin for that empire, right? Like that's kind of when things started to roll downhill. So
because Chernobyl was the straw, right, that broke camel's back. It was in terms. So where Reagan was right, if this film is accurate, and look, I'm a history major, full disclosure, like I would fall into that historian category. I went to grad school for it, all that shit. So I did my senior thesis on the Iran-Contra scandal, which gets about 30 seconds in this film.
Yeah, it's pretty brushed off. And it's kind of just played as like, no one's perfect. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just a person.
Yeah. and where he's criticized in that moment isn't for being involved or knowing or doing anything. It's for not fighting back enough.
Right.
But anyway, like the biggest vehicle per se or person that drove the end of the Cold War was Mikhail Gorbachev. He had a very progressive for the Soviet Union view and wanted to, get there.
Yeah.
I know we're in America. We like to tell stories about, we kicked ass and won and did whatever. Cool. But, right, I agree with you. Like Reagan isn't like an innocent bystander. He played a role. There's no doubt.
Clearly.
But Gorbachev was the driving force. Ronald
It was
Reagan
that Pizza Hut commercial, man. That's what did it. That's it. That's what made the Iron Curtain fall.
Oh, actually, it was Rocky IV.
Yeah, true. How can I forget?
It was Rocky. So anyway, we start back in Reagan's youth when he read a book and had a drunk father who he called by first name.
Jack, which was odd.
Yeah.
And this is very much one of those biopics where it's like, this is a whole life story, right? I think the first time we see him, it's not like he's in the womb, but he's like 6, 8, something like that. And they really, really, really take their time showing pre-President Reagan. And I honestly think that like the time in the film where Reagan was president was like the least interesting and effective part of this movie.
I agree. We get the stage where he is hitting the hottest lifeguard to ever exist in 1930. Where countless women just pretend they're drowning. To be saved by him.
And he's got I like that they showed that he has like the log where he keeps a tally. He's got like a little switchblade he carries where he makes a tally mark every time he saves somebody. And I think the final number they get to is like 77 or something crazy.
Like 72 or 77, I don't remember.
Yeah.
He was like the first person to realize that Hitler was full of shit.
I forgot about that when he's in the radio
and
he's delivering the news and they're like, the new chancellor of Germany has promised to follow all international laws and treaties and whatever and will not use violence to expand the power of his country. And I don't remember what he says, but he's like, yeah, right, or something. Like under his breath.
Sure.
The mic is muted. Cheeky little nod, I guess. Little Easter egg for the largest conflict ever.
we go forth into his acting career. His first wife, Reagan, starting to become politically involved, becomes the head of the Screen Actors Guild, all that stuff. And that's where he really starts to get this like anti-communism crusade. And the crusade, I think, is the right word because this movie's based on a book called The Crusader.
Yeah. Which is what the Russians called him, allegedly. Can
we'll get to the Russians. Let's get to them in a sec.
Okay.
So
I feel like that's a big, interesting choice.
I want to get through this part as Hollywood part first, and then we'll go to the Russians. But we see like where Dennis Quaid. Now we're getting into the Reagan played by Quaid. And Quaid actually does, and well get to this in the cast characters, etc. But I think he does an actually admirable job.
Yeah, a semi CGI de-aged Ronald Reagan at this point in the movie, and I say semi because it's shot for shot. It's very weird. Like sometimes they smooth him over, other times they're like he's far enough away, no one's gonna care. And half the people in the seats probably have cataracts anyway, so who gives a shit? Not my words. I'm saying that's the vibe it gives off.
Okay. All right. So anyway, the scowl he always has when he's taking on someone he thinks is communist.
Oh yeah, he's very big on like the expressions.
He's the law.
Especially with
he's very like Clint Eastwood and John Wayne type of thing.
He's super cowboy.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a big part of his personality in real life. And I think this movie leans into that and doubles down even harder to kind of choose that's the portrayal of that's who he is. Right.
Yeah. So we get through all that. And that's about when the Russians started watching him. And So this film is told through the eyes of a Russian operative played by Jon Voigt, noted objective person when it comes to these things. I said something before was my biggest issue with the movie. Forget that. This is my biggest issue with the movie until I think of something else.
By far.
The Russians are fawning over him. He's like,
yeah, they're like fangirling him over him.
They're gonna be him for Halloween, Hayden. They
are by the end of the movie.
Oh
my god!
I wrote in our review on our site that it felt like we were one line away from hearing a Russian operative say the words, "He makes me want to be a better man."
Yeah, because basically, so the narrative setup for this is that there is a narrator for this movie who's telling the story of Ronald Reagan to someone else, which I think was a weird and bad choice to begin with, and like totally unnecessary, because Ronald Reagan is one of, if not the most probably well-known president as far as just cultural impact, people knowing the history.
At least for people alive right now,
yeah. The iconography of him, right? So the fact that they felt the need to like do this and then give us a title card every time they made a new scene, it felt like, even places where it was obvious and redundant. Like they showed a big Full House style establishing shot of the Golden Gate Bridge, and then it's like San Francisco, 1960. I know we're in San Francisco. Like everybody knows that bridge is in San Francisco. But yeah, anyway, the digression over. So basically, it's like this guy who's like a young, villainous, really ultra nationalist, honestly, Russian guy, this younger guy who I think is in his probably late 30s, early 40s, maybe. He's kind of set up to be like the guy who's going to take over Russia after Putin, right? He's like the next generation.
Been in, by the way? Like, where do I know him from?
I don't know. He looked vaguely familiar to me too.
Yeah, we'll effort to find that.
We'll figure that out. And
continue on.
So he goes here, and his agenda basically is he goes to this retired KGB agent's apartment who was around during the Cold War, around during the Reagan admin in the fall, and was like, basically says like, hey, I want to bring the USSR back to its former glory, and I want to like do imperialism and like take over like Ukraine and Poland and all these areas again. So like, what made the USSR fall? Like, I need you to tell me that so that I know not to, make this mistake again.
What did you think of, like, I mean, I feel like they made this choice because having the Russians honestly fawn over him is gonna, like, it tells this story that everybody loved. Everybody was in awe of him. And I feel
it's so absurd for this guy who's like quite literally like Call of Duty campaign level supervillain Russian guy.
And at the end of the movie, he's taken the book that Reagan read as a kid.
Yeah, he picks it up and holds it up and has a little smile and is like, I can't wait to read this. And, the subtext is he's going down on his path where he's going to learn the good word of Ronald Reagan.
From beyond the grave, still kicking communist ass. Hayden, I can't. I do want to talk about one because there are a couple things I like about this movie. So if you're still watching and haven't commented us or whatever yet, like I appreciate that. But before we get to that, what did you think of the opening scene? I thought the opening scene was actually quite effective because we go all the way forward to 1981. We start with the assassination attempt. And what did you think of that? I felt like it did a good job to actually get people's attention and B, establish Reagan as a sympathetic character right away.
Yeah, it felt like a good cold open, right? I guess to use the TV term of just like you instantly start with something that builds a lot of tension, intrigue, whatever. But then I feel like, so I think the opening scene was actually pretty interesting and like honestly one of the bolder choices in this movie. You know what I mean?
In a movie that didn't have a lot of them, but yeah.
No, and I like, because I would for sure think this movie would start with like little Ronnie riding on his bicycle to go play baseball in the neighborhood sandlot or some shit like that, right?
Chopping down the cherry tree.
Right. So, but I think it's almost instantly undone because then they go to that like present day Moscow stuff and they have to set that all up, even though it honestly like doesn't play into the story really at all. And it just meanders. And I think it loses momentum immediately.
Because, yeah, like just when you get going at a thing, we're back in Moscow. You know?
I felt that way throughout the whole movie. Like every time I started kind of enjoying this movie, the narrator guy would start talking and I was like, oh shit, I forgot. And then we'd be back to that little apartment again.
So story-wise, it takes us all the way up through post-presidency. We get to when Reagan finds out essentially that he has Alzheimer's, right?
Yeah.
And that's we get his final horse ride because he's known for like loving the ranch and horse riding and all that stuff. And he had been thrown from a horse some years earlier in his post-presidency days, which kind of led us to this point where they were afraid that he was going to get thrown again and not know where he was and not be able to get any help.
Right.
So I'll say this, Aiden, like I found the final 5 minutes of this movie to actually be very touching, whether you like Ronald Reagan or not. I think if you have like human empathy, there's something to it that is effective. And the credits, the beginning of the credits were like Nancy Reagan at his funeral and all that stuff. I thought that was really well done. And I think it actually, was effective in making you feel for the character. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I think of like the scene was it was like cute, I guess, in a weird way, right? It was touching, right? It was this because it's just this like it's this wholesome moment of an old man realizing that he can't keep up with what he used to do, but he wants to have one last hoorah and go at it again. And it kind of plays nicely too towards the beginning of the movie because like one of the first real dates he has with Nancy, he takes her to that ranch and says that, he bought it after being inspired by, it was the first time he ever shot on location for a film. And he rode down this hill on this horse and said like, this place must be heaven or something to that effect. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it was kind of like a wholesome full circle moment for the character and kind of made me feel like, okay, like this was planned and thought out at least a little bit, right? Like there was, despite all the meandering, like there was an end goal and there was a thematic through line that I think was followed through on pretty well, even if it's not necessarily accurate to like history. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Story-wise, let's just give the story a score because we could go on about this forever. The story is a chopped up like mess of sorts. My biggest issue with the story is that it is less history than it is hagiography. It's just very idolatry stuff. Like it's and
the pacing is terrible, and I think like I feel like they build up to Reagan's presidency so much, and then they skip entire years of the presidency in like a funny little played for jokes montage. And so it feels kind of underwhelming. And I think beyond just like the debate of whether or not that's like responsible, right, to deviate so much from the truth of how a person was in a piece of historical fiction, I think it was honestly just kind of boring and hard to get invested in because like Reagan never really has any conflict or flaw or major loss in this film, like at all.
Nope.
He's always at the top of his game and he always knows exactly what to do. And it's like, every time he speaks, everyone claps and cheers, even if they're not on his side when they enter the room. And it's just like, there's no stakes is really what it is.
Can we talk about one other thing in the story before we do this?
Mm-hmm.
The prayer circle where it's ordained by God that he's going to be president.
I don't know if I even caught that.
It's there. So they're outside the pool of his house.
Oh, yes. Yep. Okay. Yeah. But explain it for folks at home who might not have seen it
Yeah,
yet.
so there's like a pastor there. There's an actor, right? Or a musician. I can't
Musician,
remember.
yeah.
Musician. Nancy, obviously.
This weird mix of his like Hollywood celebrity friends.
Yeah, and a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing like a prayer circle, and it's like the priest just says, "I see you at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue." Like, and it's like a wink, wink, nod, nod to the people who want to hear this, that he's chosen by God to be president.
And that's a common thread through this movie. Like, his mom says several times, talks about like how God has a plan for everybody. And like, I know that you've had to go through things that weren't fair or whatever, but you know, it's all part of the divine plan. And I think, like, honestly, like, we keep going. It's hard not to, but like, my one last note on the story as far as it being ineffective is I feel like they paint him as a really bad dad unintentionally, to the point of where like I forget he has kids at points.
Yeah, same.
Like, they never really show him being a dad after a certain point. Like, after the divorce, they make it really seem like he's like too busy with the president stuff and the politics to do that. And I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure he had a relationship with his children, but like, at least pay those kid actors to be like extras in the background of a couple of scenes. Like, make it look like he has a relationship with his fucking kids, man.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe he's just too busy, saving freedom for everyone and all that.
Well, because that was the real
protecting everyone else's kids, Hayden.
Yeah, that was the real sacrifice he made. Is he was like, I don't get to see my children grow up, but I know that they're going to be free to ride into the sunset. Oh my God.
And now Russia will be too, because the dude has the book, and it's all good. And we gave the story a 3.5 out of 10. So it's, which I feel at times is generous. Like, there are some moments where it hits. There are.
Mm-hmm.
But every time you get one, you actually arrive at one, it like yanks you out of it.
Yep.
With more utter nonsense and other.
And it's just it's ineffective as a narrative. I think is the best word I can think of. It doesn't work. It doesn't land.
Let's talk cast and performances. This movie's a who's who of like the MAGA fan club. Let's just be honest about that.
For sure. It very much seems like there's a lot of times where movies are pretty obvious that an actor or a director or whoever just wants to work with certain people, so they get them all in a room, right? And this is very much that.
So you've got Dennis Quaid, you've got Jon Voigt, who is like one of the most outspoken, like, weird sounding ones out there. Kevin Sorbo, who does challenge him for that on a regular basis.
For sure.
And then who else am I missing? There's one more for sure.
I don't know. The only other actor that I noticed is that the guy who plays Gregory in The Walking Dead is his like secretary of whatever.
Oh yeah. Let me do our written review here, because I know there's like one more.
Okay.
Let's see. Here we go. Oh, Robert Davi.
Oh, yep. Okay.
So he plays a like Russian. Does he play Khrushchev, or who does he play?
I don't know.
I forget.
It's
one of the pre-Gorbachev heads of state.
Yeah, and they run through them super quickly, to be honest. I mean, Brezhnev gets a lot more time than
it was Brezhnev, I think,
on screen. Yeah, but then they show the montage of just like all of these guys.
That
like,
was
having
the
funniest
funeral. Part of the movie.
It was pretty funny, and it was good. It was a good humor moment, because they basically took the same reused footage, but they just changed like whose face was on the banners, and it was like so and so state funeral 81, so and so state funeral 82, like, and it was just. It worked. It got a good chuckle.
Then they cut to Dennis Quaid going, "How can I talk to him if they keep dying on me all the time?" And that was funny. That was legitimately funny. And there was more levity in the movie like that.
I think so too, because honestly, like, especially in the Hollywood part of the movie, I think Dennis Quaid has like legitimate charisma.
Yeah.
Like
you can tell he cares about this role very much.
He does. Even down to, there's some weird quirks, right? But you can tell like there's certain mannerisms that he worked on, right? He doesn't have as small lips as Reagan, so he's always kind of like tucking in his mouth and talking out of the side a little. I think he nailed the voice.
I do too.
The voice was crazy.
And kind of the mannerisms a little bit, the vocal mannerisms at least. I think he did really well.
Yeah.
Like the cadence.
For sure.
So Castle, I mean, Quaid does an admirable job in this movie. Dennis Quaid is a good actor. Like he is.
Sure,
and here's the thing. I said it's a who's who of MAGA. Like that doesn't matter. Like who cares? But that's totally fine. My only point on that, Hayden, is like, if that's all you could get, isn't that sort of an indication that maybe this movie isn't as objective as it could have been?
That, and I can't imagine that this was like a script that people were clamoring, calling their agents like, I need to be on the Reagan set. I need to be, whoever in the cabinet or whatever random side roles there were,
My dog's excited about the movie, if you can't tell.
Apparently. there's a pretty big supporting cast here, and I think it's really hit or miss. Like I think and it's not even just hit or miss, like in the sense of like this character is really good, this character is really bad, right? I think it's like it's hit or miss scene by scene.
Yeah.
And I think especially because you're with obviously Ronald and Nancy for the majority of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they have moments where they really work. They have moments where they don't. And like, I honestly feel like in retrospect, I would have been more interested in this movie, I think, if it was like, here's how Ronald Reagan, the man, became Ronald Reagan, the president. Because I feel like I enjoyed everything. Like, I feel like it just feels like everyone was so much more interested in and put their all into the pre-presidency stuff more. I feel like you got better performances, you got better scripts, you got better production design in that time, right? They lean more into the period piece nature of it.
I feel like the presidency stuff came off as more like a bad SNL skit each time. It's like they were trying to hit the notes and they were performing they were trying to mimic something that they'd seen. Whereas all the pre-presidency stuff, you didn't have that weight or that burden. And
for sure.
You're able to, take a little bit of license with it.
Yeah.
And I think that helped.
Yeah, and I get that that's a hard thing to do, right? To recreate those certain photographs and iconic moments, right? But I feel like there's some choices in which they do it that I'm like, this actually hurt you. Like the most egregious examples I can think of is during the debates, they do this weird shit where they like superimpose Dennis Quaid as Reagan, but then like the other person that's the other candidate he's talking to, it happens twice. With two different names, Jimmy Carter and the other candidate.
And then Mondo. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's like historical footage. And it looks just so weird. Like it almost looks like it looks out of like the George Lucas Star Wars original trilogy changes to me.
Let's score cast really quick because I do want to talk about that piece in the look, sound, and feel. So cast performances we gave 3.5. I mean, like that's not a good score, but Dennis Quaid, I will say, was good in this movie. And you can tell that he actually cares about this role quite a bit. And however you feel about it, it doesn't matter. Like he's a good actor and he did a good job here. So
yeah. And this is one of those roles that is super obviously Oscar chasing, right? This is like an Oscar bait performance. And I would be kind of surprised if he's nominated. You know?
You think he will be?
No, I said I'd be surprised if he's nominated.
Okay. Yeah.
A win? No way. Not happening. I think it's a crapshoot 50-50 on whether or not he, gets a nod.
So look, sound, and feel. What do you think of the decision? Because they did it in other spots in the movie too. Not the debates were probably the most obvious, right? But other spots in the film where we get real footage with Dennis Quaid put in, or like we get the wide shots from a distance where it actually is Ronald Reagan. Like at the speech at the Brandenburg Gate, we get that a little bit towards the end.
True.
What did you think of that? Make the decision to use some real footage.
I think it worked pretty well in some of the montages and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the actual narrative of the film, right, when it's just like we're trying to recreate a specific moment where it's relevant in our story, I don't think it worked. And I think part of that is just down to like this movie looks frankly ugly. Like it looks
outside
bad.
of the ranch areas.
The ranch
like
area looks good. The set there
Yeah.
was good, and I feel like I don't know if they switched cameras or what, but I feel like the lighting always looked better there than anywhere else. But like it feels like made for streaming quality to me almost. Like where it's just everything is just so clear and sterile that it has like no character or color or flavor. And like even the scenes that are like period pieces, like they don't really make any effort to make the camera move or look or feel like you're in that time. It's like this look like you just look like people in 2024 playing dress up. You know what I mean? Like it looks like it looks like I went to like a throwback flapper event or whatever, right? And took a video on my iPhone. Like the whole movie just looks very shot on my iPhone to me.
Yeah. I'm torn on the use of the like actual footage. From one standpoint, I think it was a really good choice because it is a biopic, right? And you have like semi-recent footage. I mean, it's 40 years ago, but still, you have the ability to use it. And I think during a lot of times when they used it, they did it well. Here's the danger in it, what I see, because I could tell right away kind of what the motive was. By doing it, you're wink, wink, nod, nod, very subtly telling your audience, the version we're telling you of this is true. And it's real.
Yeah.
And the version that we're being told in this film is not.
Yeah, and doing that is a really cheap way to kind of put a seal of legitimacy and authenticity on it. Where like you trick people into thinking like, well, this is a very documentary thing to do, so this must be true. This must be based on fact. And there's a lot of omission of fact here. Like, and not
everything that's in this movie happened, right? Like we're not saying anything was made up or anything.
No.
Like that. But a lot of stuff was left out along the way, and a lot of stuff was told with details being left out.
Right. And I think the most offensive and egregious example of it is there's that scene I told you, we mentioned earlier, of that has the montage of Reagan's detractors, right? And it's kids protesting on college campuses, people doing paintings of him where he looks like Hitler. There's like a drawing of there's a drawing of him with like upside down triangles in his eyes. Like it's all very goofy stuff, except for the AIDS quilt, Tyler, like you said. And they threw that in with the montage along with the number of exactly how many people died during the AIDS crisis, right, during his administration. And I don't think they deliberately did this, but when you put things together in a montage, those moments inherently combine together to form some sort of whole, to form some sort of statement. And the way the montage is put together, it kind of has the messaging that like it is as absurd to be upset about and fault Reagan for the AIDS crisis as it is to draw him as Hitler or the devil.
I think it was extremely deliberate. I think they know what they're doing.
I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that no one would be like that.
No, I think there was a very, very intentional message.
Evil, honestly.
To take any criticism of him and label those people as ridiculous. It started when he was governor, the protests on the campuses, right? And he talks about them as if they're like young teenagers that don't know any better.
Yeah.
And then he goes and mocks them in the hallway with the
Yeah, because they have the tape over their mouth. They're doing a silent protest, and they all laugh at him. Like, laugh with him, honestly. They're like, oh, that was funny, right?
But he's mocking them.
Yeah, and then he sicks the National Guard on him later.
Yep.
And that's supposed to be played as like a win.
Yep.
Like, hell yeah, he's making the tough decisions, and he's saving this campus from these rowdy people, which is such a weird thing to do because I feel like at this point in history, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the majority of Americans understand and would agree on, regardless, like across the aisle, that like Vietnam was a mess and we should not have been there.
It was pretty polarized at that point.
At that point in history, yeah, but I'm saying now it's not.
Now, yes.
And so to play the Vietnam protesters as, you know, just some silly, annoying kids, you know, like some nuisance you gotta deal with. Because we're talking about.
Yeah, but I don't think, Hayden, that's a nod to Vietnam. I think it's a nod to the last 5 years.
Agreed.
I think it's meant to bring those feelings out.
Right, but they still use Vietnam era stuff
because that's when he did it, right? But you can just substitute young protesters for whatever, right? And the fact that they're doing it and shutting down college campuses, it's really hard for me to think that wasn't very intentional, that was left in this at this point.
Of course. But I feel like, kind of icky about authorizing state-sanctioned violence against teens, primarily.
Oh, I agree. I'm with you.
As like a big win. You know what I mean?
But we're again not the target audience, right? So I like
for sure.
They're not trying to win us.
No.
And it's the same thing with the like AIDS crisis in this film being lumped in with all that other stuff. In that, I mean, at that time, when you go read about it, if you have any interest, there's plenty of stuff you can read on it if you're watching this. But one of the officially proposed names for AIDS before they settled on AIDS was gay cancer.
Gay cancer?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So, like, yeah, I mean, there is a demonization of people who had that and a like othering of them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's just reality. And I think that they're playing to those emotions and how these people were so mean to him and blah, blah, whatever.
Right.
And then he made a joke about age at the debate and everything turned around.
Yeah.
So, but I think that the use, back to what we were talking about, the use of the real footage, interesting choice. Like I said, I do think it has the very intentional effect of trying to say that the way we're showing this to you is real.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a problem with that. So,
yeah.
Are we good to score looks, sound, feel?
For sure.
All right, 4 out of 10. That's where we are. It's my like highest mark for the film, honestly.
And your highest mark for the film is that it's below par, right?
Well, I gave it a 5 out of 10. So
okay, on your personal, so we balance them out. So you think it was fine?
Yeah, it was fine. It worked in a way that it worked in a couple of ways. One bad, one good. So we'll split it down the middle.
Fair enough.
All right, intangibles. I just want to lead with this, and then I'll let you kind of say whatever you had in mind. But one of the intangibles here is that this is based on a book called "The Crusader Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism." The author's name is Paul Kengor, and if you go look at Paul Kengor's like works,
mm-hmm.
you can tell a historian. Well, quote historian. We're going to use quotes in this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell their legitimacy and objectivity just by looking at titles a lot of the time. And when you have books titled "The Devil and Karl Marx: Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration," and you have books titled "Dupes: How America's Adversaries Have Manipulated Progressives for a Century," and you have "The Devil and Bella Dodd: One Woman's Struggle Against Communism."
He's clearly not an objective historian, right? He's using history as a lens to argue his worldview and his perspective.
I find it really interesting that this was the book chosen. Like there's no shortage of Reagan biographies.
No.
I find it really interesting that this was the one chosen to tell this story. And that choice alone tells me that a film that takes itself way too seriously, shouldn't be taken seriously at all.
Yeah, and I think that was down to the sense of that even though this is a movie largely about the latter half of the 20th century, because it's being made in 2024. It has things to say about 2024.
Yep.
And I think this movie like aged like milk already, because since they've shot this, edited it, and put it out, like I think so much has changed in the political landscape that I think it's working against them now. Because
do you think so?
Yeah, especially with
Sure.
the whole thing of him, they play that the whole thing of like playing that like he has Alzheimer's and like dementia and whatever, or I think it's Alzheimer's, right? And maybe a little bit of dementia there as well. Yeah, towards the end of his presidency, so he's kind of slipping up and struggling in debates or whatever. Like they make you have sympathy for that, and they make you feel bad for when he, is no longer in politics and retires and rides off into the sunset. But I think that like that, you get where I'm going with this?
I do, but
that
the
unintentionally paints a favorable audience or a favorable image of Joe Biden.
No, they don't care. They will unabashedly completely change that opinion based on the name of the person in the story.
Yeah. It's just
I have relatives that prove what I just said correctly on a regular basis.
I know. It just
like, it's
yeah, and I think the thing that's the saddest about the intangibles here for me, right, is that I think like there were legitimate attempts at like personifying Ronald Reagan in a way through Dennis Quaid's performance, which he clearly cared a lot about. Mm-hmm. That I think like maybe handed to a different director or using a different text as the basis for the script, like I think you can get a decent movie out of this.
There's an interesting story to be told. He is a fascinating figure in American history.
He is.
And I'm not saying a good story means it has to be negative. No, I'm saying a good story has to be true. It has to realize that no person is flawless. No person doesn't have weaknesses. No person, is immune from bad decisions. And like that part is totally left out of this. And that's what makes it not be able to be taken seriously.
Right. And it's like, even like stuff that like, and they're not leaving out little stuff, right? Because it's a 2-hour movie with half, if not over half of it dedicated to, a little too much longer than 2-hour movie. With more than half of that or about there dedicated to him outside of the presidency, right? So obviously, like, you can't touch on anything. But having like George H.W. Bush who was his vice fucking president, by the way, only appear like once as like almost like a Marvel cameo.
Right? I know.
It's like not really accurate. It's not really how the job is done. And I mean, we could go. There's a lot of things that I think about that Reagan has done in his presidency, which have led to things that have happened today or more recently than when this movie ends, right? That they just aren't interested in addressing. And maybe that's on me for going and expecting a more full picture, because this movie really is like unabashedly, fully, decidedly just about like Reagan versus communism, right? It's not interested in exploring all those other things. But
it's not nuanced Reagan versus communism, though. It's good versus evil. That's what we're getting here. Yeah.
And anything that he did in the fight to communism that was like maybe not a good idea, like funding the Mujahideen, who, if you want to know where that led, Google that. I'm not going to say it here because I want to get demonetized by saying certain dates.
Or how about, why was it that the Iran hostages were released like an hour after he became president?
Right, because that's such a weird thing to me, because like the implication there is that
there was communication happening.
No, of course, but the implication of the way it's told in the movie is that like Iran was just so scared of Reagan's riz that they caved like 2 hours into his presidency.
Right.
Before there was even any phone calls made. Just they were like, they were, sitting somewhere watching Reagan's inauguration on the TV, and we're like, we gotta release the hostages. We can't even, why even try to fight with this guy? We just can't. We already lost.
Just hurry and release him as fast as we can. Maybe he just won't remember us, God, come on. And Iran-Contra was the defining scandal of his presidency.
Mm-hmm.
And it is glossed over here as literally just a boo-boo. I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm. And they even like, and I think the language around how they talk about it is, it's playing to that, the whole witch hunt narrative of that certain politicians tell their followers that any critique of them, any legal action taken against them, any investigative journalism taken against them is not an effort to enforce justice, but it is a personality-based attack.
I'm glad that doesn't happen anymore.
Right?
Yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is I think the way they handled Iran-Contra in this movie was very deliberately done to echo the way that it's happening today.
Oh, yeah.
And draw parallels to that.
Yep. I mean, the only thing they could have done to make it more obvious was have him fall asleep in a hearing. But we've rabbit holed this thing for almost 50 minutes. So I feel like we could easily bank another 50 into this, but let's not.
Yeah.
I don't know that this movie deserves that kind of time from us. And
because I think it's honestly kind of made to be disposable. Like, I think it's made to cash in on an audience that this is not a biopic. Like, polar opposite example, Oppenheimer was a biopic that sought to teach people and get people to think. This is a biopic that is for people who love and miss Reagan to go take a little walk down memory lane.
But it also, like, Oppenheimer also did not shy away from telling you, hey, this guy's kind of an asshole, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And has flaws, many of them, right? Mm-hmm. This one, I mean, you'd think, I mean, we only get to see Reagan before he enters the phone booth, Hayden, and you know, gets the suit on. But do you think he just has like the curl on one side and then on the other, or the whatever?
You talking like this, like the Superman disguise,
yeah.
or
right?
Oh my god.
Yeah, we gave it a 3 out of 10 overall.
Yeah,
this movie just isn't like, it's just not that good.
Yeah, and it feels kind of soulless and manipulative of me. Like or to me rather. Like I feel like they knew that this movie didn't have to be good because a certain audience would see it and support it regardless of quality. Yeah. So they kind of phoned it in, except for Dennis Quaid, who unfortunately genuinely seemed to be like acting his ass off for most of this movie.
Yep.
And I do feel kind of bad for him because
I do too.
Like, I think there is a world in which Dennis Quaid does get some Academy Awards or does get at least critical praise and accolades for a performance as Reagan. But there's so much other stuff around it in this movie that just drags it down.
Some of the other stuff Hayden is brought on by him too. He's been very outspoken, especially recently, in some things that might not help him. Yeah. So
he's obviously, I'm not saying he's innocent in all this, right? Or that he's like a victim somehow, the director. I'm just saying I think he put more into his craft than most other people around him did on this set.
What the smartest quote I've heard about politics in the last 10 to 15 years in the United States was that somebody said at the 2016 Republican convention, Trump isn't a policy or anything like fact or anything. He's a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. And Reagan is the same. And this movie is appealing to that.
Mm-hmm.
This movie isn't appealing to any sort of deep cutting historical look and getting into the presidency and what the legacy is. It is rekindling that feeling.
It's comfort food.
And that's why I think it's a political ad. It's mobilizing people who have the same feeling about someone as they do about Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to galvanize them, and I think it's meant to galvanize them, and that's where I have an issue with it. I don't think there should be a political ad disguised as Oscar bait.
For sure.
So on our site, I gave it basically the same score, a little bit better actually. It was
I think I was harder on this movie than you were, so I brought the average down a little bit on the video side over here.
So yeah, it's, I don't know. I mean, if you look, if you are a conservative, big Reagan fan, first of all, if you are that and still watching us,
God bless you, man.
Yeah,
you
are the type of person we need more of in this world, quite frankly. Like, because you can listen to things that maybe you're a little icky, but it's okay because we're not really attacking you. We're talking about this movie.
Yeah.
Second, you're gonna love this movie. Have at it. Like, go nuts. If you are a hardcore liberal that also just wants to be told what you want to hear, you're gonna hate this, every bit of it. And you're not even going to be able to come around to the point that there is a good Dennis Quaid performance, and there are some like good moments in it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not great. It's definitely gonna. Dude, this is gonna go down the same road as that W movie by Oliver Stone. Okay. It's gonna be forgotten.
Yeah.
If they had done this as a mockumentary and given some levity to it, it would have been so much better. Just
Agreed.
So anyway, 3 out of 10. August was rough. Outside of Alien Romulus, August was rough.
Yeah, I was in my theater today looking at the posters and like looking at the wall, and they had like Borderlands, Trap, which was okay, this movie, and The Crow. And it ends with Us, like all next to each other, and then now playing. I'm like, that is a generational run of like mid movies actively playing in the same building. That's tough.
But Romulus was solid and good.
For sure.
The rest, Trap's already out on digital. Check it out. Borderlands as well. So
shocker.
There you go. I know, right? All right, let's get out of here. This was fun. It was more fun than seeing the movie.
Agreed.
Enjoy the movie, and we'll talk to you next week with Beetlejuice.
Woo!
Hopefully it's better than this. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Hope so.